Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden, and we're also going to stick to my home county of Skåne here in the very south of the country. Now we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel a number of times before. This beer is also kind of a collaboration but kind of not, and we'll explain why in a minute. But when it comes to this brewery, I would say that they're best known for their different kinds of IPAs and also for their lager beers as well, actually. They do quite a few different German things, generally speaking. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is a style that we have had from them before. This is also the latest in a sort of three-part kind of mini-series, I guess we could say, regarding this beer that we've done on the channel so far. The other two versions that we've had so far have been very nice, so I have to say I'm very curious to see what this third version is going to have in store for us. So hopefully this is another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head down to Malmö, which is a little bit to the south of me here in Lund, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Hyllie Bryggeri, and this is one that they've released under their Psychopipes brand. So this particular beer is Nyctophobia. This is the single malt barrel-aged edition. It comes in at 12% ABV, and this beer was released through Systembolaget in January of 2023. So a couple of weeks ago we reviewed the original Nyctophobia without any barrel aging, and then a little bit after that we reviewed the bourbon barrel aged version, which is kind of the same as this one, but it has the more kind of gold text on it, and now we have the single malt version. So both of these two barrel aged versions have been aged in barrels from the Ven distillery, which is the little islands just to the west of Landskrona, a bit to the north of me here in Lund. And yeah, the last two versions of this have been very nice, so I have to say I'm very curious to see what the single malt edition is going to have in store for us. So yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what it has in store for us. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Hyllie Bryggeri before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is hugely appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever you like. Just go to the channel homepage, use the search bar, put in whatever local area that you want. If I've reviewed beers from that area, they will pop up there. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Swedish playlist along with many other things. And you can, of course, look at the playlist of beers from other countries as well. So, yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you once again about Hyllie Bryggeri and their Psychopipes brand. So, Hyllie Bryggeri, as I've told you before, started off as the homebrewing experimentations of Michael Nathorst, who is originally from Vintria, which is a few minutes to the south of Hyllie, in the kind of southwestern part of Malmö. So for a number of years, he was actually a home brewer, and he built up his own brewery equipment in his garage where he was experimenting, brewing different things with his friends. But he started brewing there back in around 2013. But he worked for a number of years in the plumbing industry, and for a period of time, he was working 4 days as a plumber and then 1 day with the brewery. But he's also good friends with Torsten Ekne, who is the original owner of Beer Ditch in Malmö, quite a popular beer bar. And when Beer Ditch began, Mikael decided that he was going to turn his garage brewery into a proper brewery, and so he registered Hyllie Bryggeri officially in 2015. So these days, Michael is joined at the brewery by Erik Fritiof, who is a partner in the company, and he deals with the sales and marketing side of things. But he's also one of the co-founders of the Great Swedish Beer Festival. In 2017, they launched their Psychopipes brand at Bruskival, and this is what they use to release their more kind of experimental beers, if you like. A lot of the Hyllie Bryggeri beers are the more kind of trendy and drinkable things, I guess you could say. I think that's maybe a fair assessment of it, but the Psychopipes beers are the more kind of punchy and experimental ones. But in 2019, Hyllie and Limhamns Bryggeri collaborated to form a new company that owned a brewery building together, and it was there that they were brewing their beers for a couple of months. They had a 1,000 litre brew kit, however this arrangement unfortunately just didn't work out, and so Hyllie Bryggeri moved out and went to went to brew on a farm in Vintria, just outside of the city. But throughout 2020, they were actually contract brewing a number of their beers. I believe they were brewing a good few of them up at Brukeset Finn in Landskrona. But they invested in a new premises in Malmö on Stormgatan, which is very close to the central station. This was a former car park. They converted this into a brewery. They bought a new 2,000 litre brewing system, and they also recruited Johan Lagerkrantz to come in as their head brewer. He'd spent the previous 5 years in New Zealand and working in the beer industry down there, and soon after this they opened up their tap room, and it's proved to be very popular. They seem to be doing quite well. But over the last little while, they have been developing new recipes, of course, releasing new beers, and as of February 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 115 different kinds of beers, with about 40 beers having been released under the Psychopipes brand. They haven't released too many of the Psychopipes things in cans and stuff from what I understand, but I think that is something they're going to look at going forward. Most of the Psychopipes beers have been done on the little pilot kit that they have, and just released in keg as far as I know. So yeah, kind of interesting to see that they've released a couple of these, and I do hope they will do a few more things going forward. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Hyllie Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn more about the brewery, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, I think that's that for the moment. So, like I said to you earlier, this one comes in at 12% ABV. I'm sure the last one was only 11, if I remember rightly, and I forget what the original Nyctophobia was. Maybe that was 10.5. But yeah, definitely cool to see them do a single malt version. So yeah, like I say, both of these beers, the barrel-aged ones, have been aged in casks from Spirit of Ven, the distillery on Ven Island, where Tycho Brahe did a number of his things. But yeah, pretty cool. So just like to have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. There you can see the Hyllie Bryggeri symbol with the Psychopipes one underneath. I do quite like the tower in the Hyllie Bryggeri. You'll see that as you go past Hyllie on the train to the Emporia station. One of the first things you'll see when you cross from Denmark into Sweden, of course. But this is a 330ml can. I want to say that I paid 70 Swedish krona for this one, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, 70 sounds about right for this one, just from memory. But that's about €7, maybe about £6 sterling, and about $8 American, something along those lines. But yeah, 12% Imperial Stout, this one, aged in Spirit of Ven whiskey casks. So yeah, without further ado, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. I'm very, very curious to see what this has in store for us, because the original Nyctophobia was a lovely old school Russian Imperial Stout. The bourbon barrel aged one was really quite nice, and so we'll just need to see how the single malt whiskey barrel aged one turns out as well. And it's not often that you'll find beers that are aged in Swedish whiskey casks either, so that's another point of interest for me, at least, when it comes to this beer. So as you can see, this one's poured pretty much as you would expect of an Imperial Stout. You've got about a quarter finger, actually, of a lovely, very dark tan head. That's very quickly fading away to be a sort of thin, foamy layer on the surface there. But round the edge of the glass, you've got a little bit of a foamy ring there. You can see it's kind of medium-sized bubbles on this one, but very, very dark kind of tan head there. But it does look very, very nice. In terms of the colour of the beer, if we shine the light through this one, there's a little bit of that kind of Coca-Cola bourbon barrel edge to that kind of Coca-Cola Pepsi Max edge to it, if you like, a little bit of a kind of bourbon sugar or something like that. But not too much. This beer is pretty much black as night. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or any adjuncts you put in can affect the colour of the beer too. But when it comes to black beers like Imperial Stouts, that is actually quite difficult to to affect, to be honest with you. The black malts tend to shine through. But yeah, looks like a nice beer, this one. Let's have a closer look at the aroma and just see what we get out of this one. As I say, very, very curious about this beer. Nothing else really to say about the appearance, not much in the way of visible carbonation. Let's do this. Oh yeah, that does smell very nice. It's kind of interesting for me as well, as I say, because when it comes to using Scotch whisky barrels to age something, you quite often have to be quite careful with those, because even if you age it for just a short period of time, Scotch whisky barrels have a hell of a potency to them, and they can really just kind of take over the overall flavour of the beer. So you have to, yeah, like I say, you do have to be quite careful with that. But the aroma that comes out of this one is pretty damn nice, I have to say. So, on the with this one, as I say, you do still get that old school RIS thing from the Nyctophobia, but the barrel in this is actually, to me, it feels a little bit more, just in the aroma, it feels a little bit more subtle actually than the bourbon barrel aged one did. You get a lot of bourbon sugar out of this. I just wanted to remind myself, yeah, this is an all barley malt Imperial Stout. So yeah, proper old school Russian Imperial Stout, this one. But aroma wise, this is lovely. You do get the roasty toastiness of the Russian Imperial Stout on top. You can smell the lovely kind of smooth woody character in there, and you also have just a little bit of fruity character and everything you want from an Imperial Stout. Let's try and break this down though and describe it for you a wee bit more in depth, aroma wise. So, backbone of the beer. You've got a good little bit of, you've got a good little bit of kind of nice, smooth, woody character to this one. And this is the thing for me, as I've said to you on the channel before, I always find that European oak is a little bit drier than American oak. American oak is a wee bit smoother and has a wee bit more of a kind of vanilla type quality to it. So, yeah, the way the beer goes together in that sense is quite, it's really quite nice. So yeah, lovely kind of smooth oaky notes in this one. I'd be very curious to know what kind of oak that Ven have used in their barrels for this, because it does smell really quite smooth. But out of this, I do get a little touch of vanilla from the woody character, and then you get the whiskey sugars on top of that. And one thing I found generally, I've tried a few more Swedish whiskies, you know, some of the Smogens, some of the High Coasts, and of course, yeah, some of the Vens. There are a few other distilleries these days too. But yeah, the notes that you get out of this one, it's, you can smell like I've found the Swedish whiskies generally speaking are quite oily compared to Scottish ones. So you can smell that big oily whiskey sugar in this one as well, which is quite nice. It is like a very oily kind of brown sugary type note. So a lot of that coming out of this one. So yeah, lovely big kind of smooth, oily whiskey characters in there. You can smell a little touch of this. A lot of Swedish whiskies have this slightly oily, peaty kind of thing to it as well. You can definitely get a little touch of the peat out of this one. There's a little touch of the kind of grassiness in the peat as well. But then yeah, this big, smooth, oily kind of whiskey notes on top of the barrel too. I'm going to be very curious to see how this is going to infuse into the flavour of this beer. But the backbone of the the backbone of this one is really quite interesting actually. Yeah, aroma wise, that's the barrel in this is lovely, and the more that I smell of it, the more pungent the barrel becomes. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. It didn't say how long they'd actually aged this beer in the barrels for, but anyway. So yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the barrel. But on top of that, like I say, you've got this lovely kind of roasty toasty Imperial Stout. I mean, you've got that lovely kind of, you know, well fired black malt in there. So you've got that, the black malt, the roasty well fired bread crust. Then above that, you definitely get a little bit of this kind of Swedish kladdkaka, chocolate cake sort of thing. There's maybe a little bit of rye bread or cakiness in there too. So yeah, Swedish kladdkaka, a little bit of rye bread, and on top of that there's some chocolate. You do have some nice chocolatey notes coming out of this beer. So on the chocolatey side of things, you do have this nice you've got a good mix of stuff in there. I think further back on the nose you get a little bit of sort of 70-80ish% cocoa chocolate, and then further forward it does sweeten up a little bit to be maybe sort of 50% cocoa chocolate. So it's still got a wee bit of it's still got mainly a dark chocolate character to it, but as I say, it does mellow out in a sense. So good little bit of chocolatey character to this one for sure. And then on top of that, you have the nice you do have the nice kind of brown sugars as well. Yeah, the brown sugary characters in this beer are pretty damn nice actually. So there's a good little bit of treacle, molasses, whatever you want to call it in there. I don't find it overly leathery in this one. I am really wondering now if what I've said about the other two versions of this beer are consistent. I hope they are. But yeah, I get a good bit of treacle molasses out of this one. Yeah, good little bit of treacle molasses, maybe a little touch of sweet caramel, and maybe a bit of toasty brown sugar as well. But yeah, aroma wise, as I say, this beer is pretty damn nice. In terms of the hoppy side of things, the green component, I get a good little bit of floral character and a wee bit of grassy zestiness. Not so much in the way of earthy character from this one, and of course with it being an Imperial Stout, it's not the most hop forward of beer styles. This one is barrel aged, so obviously hoppy character is going to over time drop out of the beer. So we need to keep that in mind. But yeah, on the fruity side of things, then I do get quite a little bit of a phenolic, kind of brandy soaked bread type quality. This one, the cough syrupy medicine. There's a little bit of that going on in this beer, but you've also got a nice little bit of there is a nice little bit of sharper raisiny quality to the beer. Definitely some juicy plums. And then underneath that, there's maybe a little bit of a drier prune and date for sure. Definitely some nice figs, blackberries, blackcurrants. Yeah. I think everything in this one does go together pretty nicely, to be honest with you. I think this is going to be as nice as the other ones we've had in this series before. So, yeah. I think we can have a little taste of this now and see what it's all about. But lovely aroma, this one. As I say, having a Swedish whiskey barrel aged Imperial Stout is quite special, I think. Maybe I need to take a couple of cans of this one and give it to some people to review, actually. But yeah, as I always say, take a wee bit of time, pardon me, to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But I think this is going to be good. Always nice to do that. So yeah, this one is the Nyctophobia, Fear of the Night, if I remember correctly, from Hyllie Bryggeri, brewed in collaboration or released under their Psychopipes brand, I guess we should say. A 12% Imperial Stout aged on the single malt barrel aged edition, aged on whiskey casks from Spirit of Ven in Ven here in Skåne. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers. Oh yeah. That is nice. When you first take this beer in, you're going to get a lot of dryness and a lot of roasty toastiness out of it, and I just think it goes together very, very well. So yeah, this one is nice. As I say, it's actually very well balanced as well. Like, I remember, I think I probably said the same about the bourbon barrel aged one, because it did still show you a good bit of the Russian Imperial Stout, but I think bourbon barrel aging for me quite often has the effect of like smoothing out the beer, whereas single malt doesn't tend to quite do that as much. And you can get that in this beer. This one has a really nice, it does have a very nice dryness to it, and then the roasty toasty character, but you can really feel The Swedish whiskey barrel on this one's really quite interesting. Been a wee while. I've got a bottle of Ven whiskey somewhere. I think it's in my storage unit actually. I do have a bottle of Ven whiskey somewhere, and I remember it being pretty oily but pretty spicy at the same time. So this is kind of interesting. Yeah. This is lovely though. I really like this beer. I can see why they've played around with this. It'd be interesting to try to see if they do a cognac barrel version or anything else with it. I don't know if they have anything more planned for Nyctophobia. We'll just need to see. But yeah, this is good. So let's try and break this down for you and describe the flavour a wee bit more in depth. So, middle third of your palate. And one thing I would say about this beer before we get into this is that this is one of these beers where the flavour and aroma do match up pretty well. So yeah, the backbone of this beer, absolutely you get that lovely sort of smooth, you do get that lovely kind of smooth oaky character out of this one, but you get a wee bit of dryness from it as well, because of course it is, you know, I do suspect it probably is European oak that's in this one. Yeah, lovely smooth and slightly dry oaky character with this one. You know, you can feel the oak is a little bit smoother and sweeter further forward, but it's a wee bit drier further back on the palate. Toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you will get a little bit of vanilla out of the oak as well, but then you can feel the kind of sugars from the whiskey sitting on top of that. So yeah, as I say, I've often found that Swedish whiskey is very oily for me. So this dry kind of leathery oily character to it, you can feel that just sitting on top of the wood in the base of this beer, and there's a little bit of peaty character within those whiskey brown sugars as well. So there's a wee bit of that there, and I think further forward on the palate, you do get a little bit more of that peaty dryness and the slight you know, the slight kind of grassiness from that as well, which I do like. So, yeah, the way this beer goes together is actually very, very nice in that sense. Yeah, I think the kind of dryness and the smokiness really suits having the Russian Imperial Stout on top of it. It is pretty cool. So yeah, as I say, you've got this dry, the whiskey sugars on this one are quite leathery. You've got a little bit of peatiness in there, and they do have just a kind of dryness to them as well. But above all of that, you've got that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust sort of thing. So yeah, you've got that. Yeah, you've got that roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust sort of thing on top of it there. Then you have the sort of you've got a kind of, you do have a little bit more of a dense kind of like chocolate brownie, kladkaka type layer. So yeah, roasty, well-fired bread crust, a sort of kladkaka chocolate brownie layer. Then you've got a sweeter rye bready note on top of that. So yeah, the way that that goes together is very, very nice. Yeah, as I say, you got that. It really does go together nicely for me. I'm just remembering this beer, but above the sort of rye bready layer, you start to get the kind of chocolatey notes out of this one. So further back on that middle third of your palate, you have a little bit more of a kind of 70, 80 percent cocoa chocolate there. You get that really dark chocolate, but you can feel as you come further forward on the palate, it really mellows out more. You really start to get more of that in the beer, so it mellows out and just brightens up to be a more, to be more like a kind of 50% cocoa chocolate. So yeah, I think that does go together really nicely. And then in the middle of your palate, you've got this kind of circle, and that gives you the circle in there is where the brown sugars are. So under in the base of that kind of circle in the middle of your palate, you've got the kind of more leathery, brown sugary note in there. And this is one of the things, quite often there's two ways you can do an Imperial Stout to get the big mouthfeel. You can either do a longer wort boil and you'll get more leathery brown sugary notes out of that, or you can do like a double or triple mash or whatever, and that's when you'll just get the thickness. I do still wonder about this beer, because one of the other things that you have to remember when it comes to barrel aging is you'll always sacrifice a little bit of the mouthfeel to get these kind of infused flavours, but it can, and the degree of that will vary depending on what kind of barrel you're talking about. So yeah, this is the interesting thing for me, because this beer, it doesn't have too much in the way of leathery brown sugars, but above that you've got a little bit of a more kind of you do definitely have a little bit of a more kind of treacle molasses type thing coming out of the beer. So yeah, above the kind of more leathery layer, and the leathery character isn't too dry in this one, I'll point that out. Above that, you get the big, oily, kind of treacle molasses note out of the beer, and in the dead centre of your palate, you do get just a little touch of a sweeter caramel, and that of course is the concentration of the alcohol. So you get the dry chocolatey layer, the dry chocolatey layer, and the as I say, the then just the brown sugars on top of that, and that does go together really nicely. This beer, the more that you drink of this, the more it shows you the Russian Imperial Stout character. I think your palate kind of acclimatizes to the barrel in this one, I would say. So yeah, interesting. But let's go to the back third of the palate then. So the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you do get a little bit of a bready build up in there, and you still get quite a little bit of that well-fired bread crust, but the base of the back third of your palate is a little bit more yeah, you do get a little bit more of that kind of roasty, toasty, well-fired backbone in there. You can still feel that, but the wood is a little bit drier too. The kind of whiskey sugars are also a little bit drier than the roasty, toasty side of things. So you've got this really quite dry character at the very back of the palate, and all of this is all of this is quite as you say, is quite it's drier than the middle third of the palate. As I always say, drier, more bitter flavours come out further back on the palate, sweeter flavours come out further forward. But above the kind of well-fired bread crust layer, you've got a little bit of that cakey kind of, that sort of kladka chocolate brownie layer. Then you have the sweet brown bready notes, and then above all of that, I think you start to get some of the more yeasty characteristics, but you can feel those two layers, the cakey and the bready layer, are taller and more airy on the back third of the palate than they are in the middle third of your tongue. But yeah, above all of that, there are a few yeasty characteristics coming out of this beer. So, on top of all of that, you have a little bit of a, from the yeasty side of things, you do get a little bit of a sweeter brown bread in there. It's got a little bit of woodiness to it, but you also get a little touch of this kind of honeycomb type thing. I always get honeycomb on the back third of my palate for some reason, so there is a wee bit of that going on there, and that's the top layer of the back third of your palate there, and that's the yeasty influence. So yeah, back third of the palate, you can definitely feel the flavour is taller. Then as you come further forward into the middle third of your palate, it just squashes down and condenses together. So I really do like how that goes together in this particular beer. But on the I think that's everything we need to say about the malty and yeasty side of the beer. Let's look at the hoppy side of things. There's not too much to say here on this one, to be honest with you. Some of the hoppy character is still there. In the back corners of the palate, you do get a little bit of earthiness. That spreads forward, and as you reach the front corners of the palate, you've got a little bit more of a kind of floral aromatic sort of thing, and round the front curve of the tongue, the beer is just a little bit lighter and more grassy, actually. So yeah, the way that it goes together in that sense is very, very nice. So the grassy side of the beer actually has a little touch of zestiness to it, and the floral side kind of lingers there into the aftertaste as well, so that really is quite interesting. But on top of all of that, you've still got the front third of your palate. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you do get a little bit of a kind of bready build up in there, which I do quite like. So yeah, also a little bit of a kind of bready build up in there, which is nice. In a way it's kind of cakey as well, but the base of that front third of your palate, you've got the smooth wood, the roasty well-fired bread crust, also a little bit of the kind of bourbon sugar as well in there. Then above that, you've got that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So yeah, on the fruity side of things, it's kind of, as we were describing in the aroma as well, I like the fruity side of this beer. At the back of the front 30 palate, you do get a teeny little bit of raisin, juicy plum as well. There's a bit of really, on the back 30 palate, you're getting a wee bit more, or the front 30 palate, sorry, on that border region I should say, there is a little bit of that kind of phenolic cough medicine type thing coming out of the beer. So as I say, a little bit of raisin, bit of sweet, a bit of juicy plum. Then you've got the more dry pruny character, the more datey sort of thing, and then you have a little bit of a more, as I say, you've got a little bit of a more kind of, you've got a little touch of sultana or something in the base of the palate too. So yeah, dates and sultanas in there. But as you move further forward to the middle of that front third of your palate, it's got a little bit more figgy character to it, and then as you move into the front half of that front third of your palate, it's a little bit more kind of it is a little bit more kind of black. You've got a kind of black curranty character as well, and above all of that, you've got this oily kind of blackberry type note out of the beer too. And these are things we have noticed in the other versions of this beer too. And they are things you would expect of an old school Russian Imperial Stout. As I say, I really do like how this one goes together. It does show off the Swedish whiskey character quite nicely with that sort of oily, leathery, kind of peaty character. That really does linger into the aftertaste. You get more and more of that out of the middle third of your palate, the further into the flavour with this beer you go. But yeah, another very solid version of Nyctophobia actually. But yeah, I think that is everything we need to say about the flavour of this beer. In terms of the mouthfeel then, definitely full-bodied. I would say maybe in the mid-range of full-bodied actually. That's probably a good way to describe this one. So mid-range, full-bodied. Carbonation is very, very smooth. It has got a little bit of a silky character to it, but at the same time, it has a bit of dryness, which is kind of interesting. In terms of hoppy... in terms of hoppy character, I would say this beer does have a little bit of green component there. In terms of IBUs, it's quite easy in this beer to kind of conflate dryness and bitterness, because you've got both the hops giving you a bit of bitterness, you've also got a bit of bitterness from the kind of black malt in the beer, but you're getting quite a bit of dryness out of this one too. So if you combine all that together, this beer I would say it's probably about 70-ish IBUs, something like that. But always take my IBU counts with a pinch of salt. This is my weakest point in beer reviewing. I can always get this wrong. But yeah, the malt base, as we said, has roastiness to it, it's got smoothness, you've got a bit of sweetness in there as well, but it's a dry sweetness I would point out. The barrel character's got a bit of leathery, as I say, it's quite leathery and it's quite dry. The fruity character in the beer though has a little bit of sharpness, but mainly it's more oily and smooth, I would say. But yeah, the way that everything goes together in this beer, I think, is very, very nice. So it gets a big thumbs up for me, this one, and a very interesting sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? This has been a really interesting beer for me because I haven't tried any, I don't think I've tried any Swedish whiskey barrel aged beers at all. So this has been really interesting from that perspective too. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. This one was the single malt barrel aged version of Nyctophobia 12% Russian Imperial Stout from Hyllie Bryggeri, released under their Psychopipes experimental brand range. So yeah, let's leave it at that. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Hyllie Bryggeri and Psychopipes as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys again at some point in the very near future. But until the next time, slàinte, skål, cheers, see you guys in the next review.